everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not talking on this podcast or writing all about endurance sports in a million other locations, I am hopefully outside doing one of those endurance sports.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach, and you are here on the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we talk about all different types of movements and sports, and we try and pull that back into the different movements and sports that you like to do.
You know, I was just at the World Cup in Waterloo, Wisconsin this weekend.
For cyclocross, yes.
Yeah, the cyclocross
Not
World
tennis.
Cup. And I was super excited how many people came up and asked where you were, first of all.
Well, that's good.
People who listen to the podcast. So if you came and said hi, thank you so much for coming out and hanging out and chatting.
People recognized your New Jersey twang.
I know, yeah. I had a couple different people. I'd be walking on the course talking to someone, and someone would be like, wait, is that Molly? So I guess I have a more distinguishable accent than I necessarily realized.
Some fans of Shred Girls, and I saw some cell phone covers, and then there was a couple Saddle Sore the book. Fans. I don't know if they're fans of Saddle Sore the book, but I'm emphasizing the book. They're not fans of but they've overcome because of the book. There you go.
Yeah, it was just a really, really, really fun weekend, and it was super cool getting to chat with all these different people. Muddy? Yeah, the racing was, it's never been muddy in Wisconsin. It has historically...
In the whole state.
In the entire state, forever. No, at the Cyclocross World Cup at the Trek headquarters...
Thank you. Context.
It has historically been boiling hot and bone dry. And all of a sudden, you woke up at 4 a.m. on Sunday before the World Cup to rain coming down in buckets. And, I'm not saying this lightly. I went out for a run at 8 a.m., and I have never run in that much rain in my entire life.
Which is saying a lot, because we have a good habit of going out on a nice sunny day in the summer and getting just completely caught in the worst typhoon of the summer. Is typhoon water?
I think so.
I think that's a typhoon.
Remember the time my dad had to rescue us because it rained so hard when we were trying to walk to a family event? Yes. It was worse than that.
Okay. So there was a water spout.
Yes.
Okay.
At one point it lightened up just enough that I could stop and get a coffee and a scone near the house.
This is not selling how bad it was.
Did
you get avocado toast as well?
You're just not going to let me finish any story this morning, are you?
Well, this was a horrible lead-in. There's a typhoon, a literal water spout.
I was getting there. It, edged out to a drizzle at the end of my run, and I was like, okay, great. I'm going to get a scone. I'm going to get a coffee. This is going to be perfect. I'm going to walk back. Got my coffee, got my scone, got out of the thing, and immediately it just dumped rain again. The rain had been saving itself up for a few minutes.
Right, just to take your millennial self and just soak your avocado toast.
I didn't get avocado toast.
Okay, so we did that, so that's good. Did you write or video anything that people can check out from the World Cup?
Yes, you can find a bunch of stuff over on Flowbike's website. I did a bunch of different videos for them. I'm still putting out stuff for them now. I have a ton of content backed up, so working through that. There is a gallery over on shred-girls.com of the women's race that I shot. And there's going to be some stuff over on bicycling as well. So look for links to that on my socials. I'll be sharing all of that as it kind of keeps coming out. That's at Molly J. Herford for anyone who is new to the show.
That's awesome. You were busy.
Yeah, very, very busy. It's been a really fun weekend. It's been a while since I've been kind of in the trenches reporting. And it was literal trenches, slipping and sliding around. One girl skidded into me and sent a tidal wave of mud towards me in the last lap of the race. So that was good.
Right. It's a very good theme of water-based natural disasters.
Yeah. How about you?
I was at the 8 Hour in Barrie, Ontario, so this is a big sort of year-end fun event. So it was good riding. Saw a lot of people, had a lot of good conversations. Seemed like the end of season, should I continue riding question was big. So I did a post on Instagram that then I turned into a post on my website at smartathlete.ca. So you can check out Instagram as well if you want to see my musings on this. But end thing is just make sure you take a week off at some point. A couple more weeks if you're injured or sick. But when in doubt, it's definitely the time of year. Even if you're into cyclocross, but especially if you've raced a full season. So that was that. Good fun at the race, good talking to people and seeing everyone.
Yeah, and then just a couple of housekeeping items. We have Peter has a few cyclocross clinics still coming up. You can find out about them over at smartathlete.ca. And
we'll link in the show notes too.
Yeah, and then we finally have all of the dates and the information out for the women's gravel training camp that we're going to be holding in Girona, Spain in March.
And this is adult women.
Yes,
I think it's important. Women. We do a bit of the shred girls stuff, of course, but this is more directed at adult women.
Yeah, so if you're interested, definitely check that out. I mean, I know March sounds like it's ages away, but it'll creep up pretty quick. So yeah, definitely look that up. We'll have that in the show notes as well. And then, before we dive into today's guest, if you've been wondering about how our La Cloche run went, if you head over to theoutdooredit.com, I have a lot of articles about how it did not go as planned, and how that's okay. I think we're actually going to have someone on to kind of talk about it in a more global, what does failure mean for racing sense. But I mean, really, it was an adventure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very common, right? I think people, especially in their day-to-day, don't, they're used to seeing podium, or they're used to seeing people winning marathons or whatever, right? But there's a lot of swing and miss, right? There's the classic, I think there's a Wayne Gretzky and a Michael Jordan quote about, I've missed 90% of the shots I took or something.
Mm-hmm. And you miss all the shots that you don't take.
Right. I feel like there's like ones that are comical like that too.
And actually that leads very nicely into today's guest, Megan Roche. You might remember her husband, David Roche, co-author of The Happy Runner, was on back in February.
Yeah, really good. People like that episode. Very positive.
Yeah. David is my coach. This was actually my first chance getting to chat with Megan, and it was a really, really fun conversation. We actually do touch on the La Cloche incident, we'll call it.
Oh, because this was after you've talked. Okay, that's great. Good.
Yeah, so we kind of talk a little bit about this idea of, what it means to be mentally tough and mentally resilient, and honestly, to some extent, like the weirdness you feel about being resilient, and like, are you being too resilient? Is it okay to be resilient when you feel like you should be mourning the loss of a goal more, or wondering if you should be? So it's a little bit philosophical in the middle there, but I think in a really helpful way for a lot of people. And we also talk about a bunch of practical running stuff as well, and I think it's a really interesting episode. It's a really good compliment to David. So if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely go back and listen to it. If you haven't picked up their book, The Happy Runner, definitely pick it up. And I'll say that even if you're not a runner,
100%, yeah. If
you're an endurance athlete,
someone who was talking to me, over the weekend about, being a little down or wondering what it all means and should you race cyclocross and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best books on kind of like a happy, optimistic mindset without being obnoxiously, all positivity all the time.
And Megan just had a big injury and maybe still dealing with that. Yeah.
Yep. So we talk about that a bunch too. So yeah, if you're dealing with an injury, again, even if you're not a runner, I think this is a really good one, because we talk about some of the pluses and how an injury can, you can look at it in a positive light.
And you have a couple posts on theoutdooredit.com about the incident, as you call it.
The incident.
Cool.
So without further ado, enjoy this episode with Megan Roche. The first question I kind of always ask someone, especially when it's someone who's a very multi-hyphenate type person like yourself, is when someone comes up to you and says, what is it that you do? How do you describe yourself these days?
That's a great question. So I usually start as a runner, just because I feel like running is so wrapped up in my identity, and it's probably the thing that when I wake up in the morning, it's the thing I'm most excited about. So I usually say that I am a professional trail runner and coach, and that I do a lot of writing and talking about running. And then in addition, I am a physician, and I am doing a PhD actually starting next week at Stanford. So I'm super excited about the combination of all of those.
That's so exciting. What's the PhD in? Do you have a specific thing you're going for?
Yeah, so my PhD is in epidemiology, which is a very long word to describe essentially data science in medicine. And so I will be looking at genetic predictors of injury, and then also doing some research on bone stress injuries and other injuries in athletes. So I've been working with the Stanford track and cross-country team and looking at bone stress injuries in those athletes.
Oh, that's so cool. And obviously a subject that is, I'm sure, very near and dear to your heart.
Yes, and it's just like it's such a rewarding population to work with because I've gotten to know the athletes well, and they're a highly motivated population, and they're just like interested and engaged in the research project.
So I have to back up. How did you come to find running and trail running in particular? Because I know you kind of came from a different path.
Yes, so I grew up playing a bunch of different sports. I played soccer and basketball and ultimately went to college to play field hockey. And kind of what was woven through all of those sports is that I loved running. So the day when the coach would call everyone to the line to do wind sprints, I always got excited, complimented by those like nervous butterflies that you get on the start of a line, just because I loved the process of running. And then in college, after finishing up field hockey, I took a fifth year to run track and cross country and really dove into the sport during that time. I also realized, though, that I'm probably not the best mentality for running on the track. After that experience, I went on to become a trail runner just because I love the freedom of running in nature and using running to explore different trails.
Okay, and obviously trail running like clicked for you, not just in terms of what you love, but what you're good at. So what do you think made you, become such a good trail runner in addition to, loving it?
So I think for me, I have always loved like being an athlete at the core. And so I felt like when I transitioned from the track into trail running, it kind of combined those skills that I loved as a soccer player and a field hockey player and a runner. So it was like jumping over rocks or, flying down a downhill and trying not to fall flat in your face. Like those are all things that I trained doing as a kid. And it just kind of combined my love for all of the sports and running at the same time. The other thing, too, is I think I've always thrived off of being more of a strength athlete. And to me, trail running just rewards strength and resilience more than track running or more than some of the like road running or typical marathon racing.
Yes, I completely agree. And I feel like that's kind of a big thing for me as well. Why I really kind of fell in love with trail running is I think I'm actually much more built for long distance trail running than I am for, say, like road marathon, because I'm much more of like a muscular athlete compared to the people that you see winning marathons, for example.
Yes, I totally agree. And of course, like there's so many, like I think marathon running also rewards that too, but I think like trail running, it's such an asset. And I think for me too, it's like the way that my brain works is I just love like the freedom to try different things or to experiment. So like, in a long distance ultra race, it's like trying out different fueling options or like there's just like so many different ways that you can kind of be a free spirit on the trails in a way that like cranking out like consistent splits or consistent track workouts, it's very different on the track and the roads.
Yes, absolutely. I enjoy trail intervals much more because there isn't really like a certain number you can necessarily hit or a pace if you're on a different trail that you haven't been on, right? It's just go hard.
Yeah, and I find it's so refreshing. I find for athletes that I coach who are transitioning from being track or road athletes that transitioning into that and being like, oh, well, I'm not defined by this exact split, or I don't have to set out and try to hit this split, and this isn't what defines success in a workout. I think it's so freeing to come to that realization. And I think for a lot of athletes, I think it supports like healthier long-term running.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, so that wasn't going to be my initial question, but now I really want to know. So, I mean, I'm sure you get a lot of athletes coming to you who are kind of that type A person who wants a pace and exact split and like goal and that kind of stuff. How do you work past that and get them to be like, no, it's okay if you're not running on a certain pace because this trail is, different from day to day?
Yeah, so for athletes who are trail runners, I really emphasize that by me as a coach, giving them specific splits or specific efforts, it's very possible that I could be limiting them as a runner because it's hard. I think on trails, it's hard to generate like specific paces, specific efforts that are specific to what the athlete is training for. Mm-hmm. And I really want them to develop that relationship of running by feel and running by effort, because ultimately when a race comes around, I want athletes not to be constrained by pacing and not to be constrained by exact splits. And getting into the habit of training that way in a workout makes it a lot easier to have that approach on race day. And I find too, it harbors consistency, because I think when you're not judging, when you don't have that opportunity to judge yourself during a workout, it becomes a lot easier to hit workouts and to really embrace them as a fun part of the week as opposed to something that could be potentially like a dreaded part of the week.
Yes, that's kind of exactly what I've found, because obviously I work with David, your husband, and he kind of has, obviously a pretty similar view on that. And I keep saying he's the only coach I've ever been able to work with. Most coaches give up on me after like a month because I am terrible for like not wanting to record everything perfectly or like wear a heart rate monitor or anything like that. And this has been the easiest way for me to actually follow training, which in turn has led to better performance, as it turns out.
I love that. And I think for me, I think probably like 80 or 90% of the runners that I coach and work with have the tendency to drive towards perfectionism and kind of like wanting to nail the exact workout. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you remove those constraints, it's remarkably freeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I'm gonna kind of change topics completely, because the one thing I have been dying to talk to you about is this idea of body image and weight and stuff like that as a runner. You guys talk about it a ton in your amazing book, The Happy Runner. Dealing with that idea of a runner needs to look a certain way or a runner needs to be a certain weight. I remember when I first started working with David, I was like, I think I should lose 5 pounds. And he's like, I don't think that's a thing that you should be thinking about at all. And it turned out it wasn't, and it's worked out really well. But yeah, I mean, I'd love it if you could just kind of talk through how you came to your current stance on body image and running and finding the quote unquote right weight as a runner.
That's a great question. I would say that body image and running is probably one of the most important topics in running. And yes. I think it's something that like I would just love for everyone to have more open conversations about, just because I think it really furthers the dialogue, but also normalizes it too. Because I think from coaching athletes, again, I mentioned that perfectionist tendency before. I just see so many athletes who are prone to thinking about body image, both females and males. I think sometimes it's often underrepresented in the male population. But for me, I personally experienced that like transition to thinking too much about body image, because as a field hockey player, it was like I never really thought about what I ate. I viewed fuel as performance, fuel as strength. I would go out and have like nachos and pizza and beer on like before competition the next day. And then once I transitioned to that college track experience, I felt like my teammates were thinking a lot about body image, and as a result, I did too. And for me, it was just like such a drastic shift to go from the mentality as a field hockey player to a runner. And I ultimately I was never formally diagnosed, but I'm sure I had some form of disordered eating, and really viewed running as this like power to weight ratio, which in reality it's not. Running is about having the strength to develop consistency over time. And what happened is that I progressively lost weight and had some strong performances actually for about 6 months or so. And then my body just tanked. It was like injury after injury, and then overtraining and not feeling like I had the energy to run. And I see that far too often in runners, where you can kind of maintain a strong power to weight ratio by losing weight initially. And it really does come back to bite you. And sometimes I think the problem is that we don't have the feedback from people who go through that and come out the other end. But for me, that was eye-opening, and it shifted the conversation for me and made me want to go out and just talk about it and be open about the experience that I had as a runner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spend a lot of time with other runners, and I think pretty much every runner I've ever talked to will at some point admit, like, yeah, I want to lose 5 pounds. It's always 5 pounds or 10 pounds or something like that. And it's funny because like most of the time, like it's such a we're prone to like those the multipliers. So it's like 5, 10, 15, 20. Exactly, it's such an arbitrary thing. Yeah. I'm like, if you said to me you want to lose like 7.3 pounds, I might be like, okay, you have a basis for that. You figured it out. But I think since I was like 12 years old, I've always wanted to lose 5 pounds, like quote unquote. And it doesn't even matter what I weigh. I will still say I want to lose 5 pounds. I haven't weighed myself in 2 years. And I'm still like, yeah, I kind of want to lose 5 pounds. So how do you deal with when a runner you're coaching comes to you and says, I want to lose weight? How do you talk them through that?
Well, I think it depends on the situation. So there are some runners who come to me and they might be considered overweight, or they might be obese, or like they might have like a legitimate reason for needing to lose weight. And that becomes a very different conversation, and one in which I'm very careful about, because oftentimes it can be a slippery slope. You know, if a runner wants to lose weight, it's like you want to make sure that that doesn't become a habit, or that doesn't become something that they become addicted to. And so that's a little bit of a different conversation. A lot of runners that come to me, they say, you know, I want to lose 5, 10, 7.3 pounds.
Yep.
And often it's not, I don't think it's a productive thing for them. My philosophy with athletes is I'd rather have you be 1 pound overweight than 5 pounds. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so important not to get into a pattern of negative energy availability that in many of the situations I talk athletes out of it, and just really highlight the concept that running is about strength and consistency over time. And it's nearly impossible as a runner to have negative energy availability, or be trying to lose weight, and to be performing at a strong level in the long term. And that's where that conversation often goes. The other thing that I mentioned too around this topic too is that we all have different genetic set points. And so what might look healthy on one runner might actually be unhealthy for another runner. And it's hard. I think playing the comparison game with weight is something that runners should avoid, and something that, again, I would love to have more conversation about.
Yes, I could not agree more. And I mean, again, it's, you know, you kind of hear it with every group of runners. It's going to come up, and it's hard not to start hearing like, oh, she weighs 5 pounds less than me. Does that mean I'm the wrong weight? Like, would I get faster if I lost it? But yeah, it just seems like kind of a futile thing, because it doesn't really seem like anyone ever hits the point where they're like, oh, okay, I'm at a good, like, this is good. I don't need to lose 5 pounds.
And I think that's such an important point too, is that like everyone struggles with this. And I think like you brought this up earlier, but I feel like if you ask runners, 90% of people would say, oh, I don't love my body image. And I think once people understand that that's like a normal thought process, it almost makes it like you can have those thoughts pop into your head, and it becomes easier to clear them, or to accept them, or to like think about like why they're there and why they exist.
Yes. So how do you walk the line of eating healthily and, you know, actually taking in good nutrients and all that kind of stuff, while that kind of open-ended, like pizza, nachos, like everything's amazing kind of eating process?
That's another really good question. So I have a lot of people who struggle with that. It's like, well, I want to eat healthy, but it's like, I find that oftentimes too many rules, or like heavily constrained diets, can be like eating disorders, or disordered eating in disguise. And so I think it's a tough line to walk between wanting to eat for performance and, you know, just wanting to have like a normal balanced diet, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So for me, I try to just make sure that I am eating things I'm craving, that I'm eating things that are delicious, things that excite me, and at the same time trying to make sure they're reasonably healthy. But really, at the end of the day, I just try to eat as many different foods as possible, and make sure that I don't have like rules surrounding that.
Yes, I think the
particularly
rules,
for time of day that I'm eating. I never really, when I had disordered eating in college, I never really struggled with like the timing of it, but I work with some athletes who have very specific rules about like what time meals should be, or what time snacks should be. And I think removing that pressure and just allowing yourself to eat when you're hungry, and to eat as many delicious things as possible, is helpful.
Mm-hmm. So my husband, Peter, who's usually my co-host, he's out today, but he was also wondering though, you know, when you're talking about someone who's time limited in terms of how much they can run, and, you know, saying they do maybe have a bit of weight to lose, I just kind of wanted to speak to the fact, do you believe in the whole you can't outrun a bad diet? Like at some point we do have to actually eat fairly healthy if we're going to actually get to a, you know, reasonable body composition. Yes.
Yeah.
No, maybe. So sorry, that was super open-ended.
Yeah, so I think this speaks also to the genetic point. I think everyone's genetics are different. So some people have higher baseline levels of cholesterol, higher baseline levels of glucose, and things like this. So, or higher predisposition to diabetes. So I think it really depends on individual circumstances, and it's hard to kind of like draw that line of what you can outrun. I would say that it's easier in your youth. So I see a lot of college athletes who can eat whatever they want, and it doesn't impact their, you know, these long-term metrics. But I think that really depends on the individual level. Yeah. And I think just trying to use common sense as much as possible. So, I think going out to eat nachos 5 or 6 times a week probably isn't productive for long-term health. And that's something that is that needs common sense. But going out on the weekends and enjoying yourself and having fun, I think is more than fine, especially if you're running.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm very into the 1 or 2 nacho nights a week.
Yes.
I definitely find myself on the, okay, maybe it's time to add a couple more vegetables back in side of things more often than not. So it's
or
it's
you
a
can
balance.
throw some spinach on the nachos. I've definitely gotten creative with nachos before. It's like, can you put broccoli on nachos and make it delicious? Or like,
absolutely.
What can you do to like spice up these delicious recipes?
Yeah, for sure. And okay. Total shift of topics, because there are just so many big ones that I wanted to cover with you. The next one is injury. You had a pretty major hamstring injury in the last couple of months, so let's just start with that. How has recovery gone with that?
Good. It's been going shockingly well, actually. So back in May, I ruptured my high hamstring. I was running in Boulder and stepped in a prairie dog hole, and I immediately felt a grab in my butt, and it kind of felt like I sprained my ankle, but in my butt. And so I called David, my coach, and was like, I think I just ruptured my high hamstring. And then it felt a little better, and I kind of like jogged home and was like, no, I'm fine. And then ultimately did realize that I had a ruptured high hamstring and had surgery on it. In some sense, though, the ruptured high hamstring was a blessing for me because I was dealing with high hamstring tendinopathy for 1.5 years and was really riding that roller coaster of some days having good hamstring days, some days having bad hamstring days, and like struggling to find the pattern and consistency in it all. And it was overwhelming as an athlete to have that like roller coaster for a whole 1.5 years. So
sure.
In some sense, the hamstring's been great because I have this like post-op protocol. It's actually attached, which I probably have gotten to the point where I had a 20% hamstring. So I think in some sense, actually surgery has been really helpful for just like allowing me to have a more linear recovery process.
It's so interesting. Peter was just reading a book about back pain, and it said the one major plus of getting back surgery, and the guy who wrote it does not really believe in back surgery, is just that it forces this post-op protocol, and that's actually what does much more of the good. So I feel like that's a pretty common thing, right? Like the surgery is obviously important, but it's more the recovery process after and actually taking that time off, not being like, well, it feels maybe okay today, so I'll kind of try to run. And then that injury, re-injury process.
That's so true. And I've seen this with other athletes that I've worked with as well. But for me, it allowed me to go back to the fundamentals. So I was non-weight bearing for 6 weeks. So it was like I was starting with, I called my leg the baby quad just because it had shriveled to like nothing by the time that I had started bearing weight again. But it allowed me to just build everything back up from zero and focus on strength, focus on biomechanics, and essentially just like start with a whole new body and start over again. And there was something just really awesome about that, I think, both mentally and physically. And it's been empowering in the last 15 weeks as I've rehabbed from surgery.
Okay, that's just such a great emotional way to look at things. It's instead of looking at it as, oh my gosh, my life is over, my season's over, or whatever, I feel like you looked at it as like a chance to have this like makeover montage moment and just...
Yes, they should really advertise that in surgery. It's like getting like a hamstring butt lift. It's like my makeover montage moment. Yeah, I'm sure insurance companies wouldn't pay for it at that point.
Yeah. But I mean, if you could just set it to music and, cut it to like 2 minutes, it would be an amazing little montage of coming back. I mean, it gives gives you a comeback story.
I think the other thing for me in this hamstring process was, so I had seen a couple of different surgeons actually to try to figure out who was going to do the surgery for my hamstring. And in the process, I was told by 4 surgeons that I wouldn't make a return to running again, just given the way that the hamstring had ruptured. It had ruptured tendon off tendon as opposed to tendon off bone, which is like more of the classic hamstring rupture. And ultimately, I did find a surgeon who told me that he thought I could return strong and perhaps return stronger than before, just given the way that the surgical mechanics worked. And as a result, it was like I went from totally being at zero, thinking like I wasn't going to have a running career again, to having this hope. And I think for me, it's like now every day is a gift, or every day that I'm able to get out there and run and work through this is a gift. And I've seen that with other athletes going through injuries too, even something that's less major than this. It's like just the restoration of appreciation for simply getting out the door to run.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to a much less extent. I had a bit of a minor knee thing last year that, yeah, made it so every run hurt. And it was such a shock to me to realize that I had just taken it for granted that running was a thing that like didn't hurt anymore. And yeah, kind of getting through that and coming back now, every time I run, I'm like, oh, okay, this is actually amazing. I'm not, annoyed that I have to do 5 more miles or, 2 more intervals or whatever. I'm like, oh, thank God I get to run.
Exactly. Do you find that it's interesting in this process, I found that I do have a little bit of what I call injury PTSD. The PTSD is a strong word for it. It's like if sometimes if I wake up in the middle of the night and have hamstring pain, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doomed. The world is ending. Do you have that with your knee where you feel like you're like, not necessarily like, it's just that you're afraid of it, or, you might interpret different signals because of the past that you've had?
Yes, it's like it's phantom pain, I feel like. It's like you read about, if someone has something amputated, they can still feel that limb. I feel like it's like that with athletic injuries. There's like this ghost of the injury just kind of malingering in the area. Like, do you hurt? Maybe.
It's so true. And I find it's funny too, because it's hard to separate out what is ghost and what is real pain. And that becomes for me like one of the hardest things as an athlete. And it's something that I find that just kind of like mentally tugs on you too.
Yes, absolutely. And okay, so you are a doctor, a coach, and an athlete. So do you feel like you have 3 different personalities approaching the injury, or do you have like a holistic approach?
I would say more of a holistic approach. I try to shut out the doctor window when I'm analyzing my own injuries.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, you mentioned before choosing a different, going to different surgeons and, talking to them. I feel like there's a lot of athletes who get injured and go to one person and, just whatever they say is kind of the end all be all. Can you speak to the importance of, seeking other opinions when you are kind of in something that critical?
Yeah, so I ultimately went to 5 different surgeons, which I realize is a lot, but the first 4 told me I wouldn't return to running, so I was like, I'm just going to keep searching until I find someone who has confidence and who can inspire confidence in me. And the surgeon that I found, Dr. Gennario out of Seven Denver, was just incredible, and I instantly knew the moment I walked in the door, and he walked in with like that confidence that I wanted him to be my surgeon. And I tell athletes, I think sometimes athletes are hesitant to seek multiple opinions, but it's just powerful. It's like, I think you really have to, like, your body is your own tool, and it's so important to speak up in the medical field or when you're visiting a doctor, and just make sure that you're getting the care that you receive. And it's been eye-opening to me to be both a doctor and an athlete, because I have like a little bit more of an understanding of that process. And, sometimes doctors make mistakes, and like, being able to advocate for yourself is just powerful.
It's so funny. This self-advocacy thing is this kind of new term to me, I feel like, and it's something I keep trying to practice, and I'm terrible at it. I was just realizing today I was getting I went to a tailor to get a dress hemmed, and, she pins it, and she's like, oh, is this a good length? And I probably would have put it like 2 inches longer, but I didn't want to say that because I didn't want her to have to repin it. So I was like, no, this is great, fine. And now I'm going to have a dress that's slightly shorter than I wanted it to be. And I'm like kicking myself as we're talking. So I'm like, man, if I couldn't advocate for myself with a tailor, how am I supposed to do it with like a doctor in this situation?
It's so hard. And I think it's actually, I see it more of an issue or like harder for female athletes just for whatever, and it makes sense given like, everything that females have to like rise up against essentially. But I think for me, I've noticed it's become a problem for me. Like, it's one of the greatest things that I struggle with. And so I have this bridge where it's like, I kind of am like, well, if you think it would be best, and it's like, I kind of like, I have to be more powerful in how I approach it, but I use like kind of that like qualifying language, and then I kind of like make my request or advocate for myself.
Yep. I feel like I almost need to have it like written down and like if I was in your situation, I'd probably have to have it like written down and like go in and like hand it to them, just because I'm terrible at actually speaking my mind sometimes. So
it's so hard. I feel like we all need to practice in front of the mirror and just like have a few sentences that we need to speak our mind and just get it into our life pattern.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of things in front of the mirror, one of the things I remember loving about the Happy Runner was this idea of like writing out, you know, a mantra or like a almost note to self that was somewhere that you could see it all the time. Do you currently have one of those up anywhere?
Yeah, so a theme throughout our book was this concept of you are enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's funny. It's like David and I wrote this book, and some of those messages, it's like I need to go back and reread the book at like critical moments in my life. Mm-hmm. Because I think for me, like I often struggle with that fact of being enough. And it's one of those things, like I feel like my personality is such that there's always more I could do, or there's always more I could give to someone, or always ways in which I can improve. And just standing in the mirror in the morning and looking at myself and saying, you are enough, has been something that's powerful for me, especially as like stress starts to build or I'm in new life situations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. So last week I was trying, my like last big goal of the season had been to try for this 80-kilometer like FKT loop at this park near us. And it did not work out. We had a navigational mishap and ended up running 5 miles backwards along the course, which sounds really hard to do, but it was a very gnarly trail and it was a very twisty section, so it happened. It's embarrassing. Anyway, didn't get it, and I had told a bunch of people, and I was super upset and really bummed to have to, like, tell a couple of friends that, you know, like, okay, I'm back at the park, we didn't make it, but I needed to tell them because they would be, like, calling the park ranger if I hadn't gotten in touch with them that day. So I texted them, and one of them sent me back just remember, this didn't define you. Like, you are enough. And I was, like, in tears over it. It was, like, the nicest thing someone could have said to me at that point.
That's so meaningful. Also, navigational errors are tough. I think every trail runner, anyone who's done like some longer adventure, has been in that position before, and it's like it's so defeating to get lost and to feel like you're off course, especially when you put in the miles that you've put in and the work that you've put in. And it's remarkable how you responded to that. Yeah,
it was. Oh my gosh, you should have seen me on the side of the trail, just like bawled my eyes out for like 5 minutes and just so angry because it wasn't until like we flipped it accidentally at mile 15 and then it wasn't until 5 miles later, so mile 20 of this run, that I realized, because we passed the same people that we'd passed on the way out, and they're like, oh, we thought you were doing the whole loop, and I was like, oh god, no, they must have taken a shortcut. Like, my brain could just not compute that happened. Oh, so bad.
How has your thought process been since? I know that's one of those things that's like, I feel like you go through like the different stages of grief when you go through something like that. And like for me, eventually I wound up getting a comedy, but like, how has that been for you?
That actually, the stages of grief is perfect because it was first denial, then it was a lot of anger. I'm like, you know, trying to like not blame Peter for it, not blame myself for it, and then just like desperation, bargaining, like maybe we could turn around and like make it and do it, and then finally it was acceptance. Actually, so this is interesting. I feel like I flipped the switch on it pretty quickly. Like, even with it, you know, I had my like crying jag for like 5 minutes, you know, then we had to keep moving because we're out. We might as well finish the run, you know, not hike it in. We've got 10 more miles, so we did it. And I think I like kind of mentally got over it pretty quickly. Like by the time we got back to camp, we were, you know, laughing and hanging out, and I had a chipmunk jump on my hand to eat a chip and hang out with me, and we had a campfire, and I then felt really guilty that I wasn't devastated about it longer. But all I could think was like, well, what am I going to do? Like, there's nothing I can change about this situation. It's here, it's happened. And I mean, of all the ways to end a run like that, or have a run like that not go according to plan, like I didn't sprain an ankle or tear a hamstring or get giardia in a lake trying to filter water. You know, like no one got injured. We got out of the woods just fine. And, you know, I was running the next day and everything felt great. So of all the things to go wrong, a navigational error is not the worst.
I am just so impressed by that outlook. And I wonder too, like based on everything that I know about you, it seems like you've just had a lot of experiences where like you've been defined by resilience, or like opportunities where that might not have gone the way that you've wanted, and you've turned those into like these like incredible new opportunities. And so it seems like a part of that, I wonder, is like you seem to have really good practice in this area.
I hope so, or I like to think so, but then I was like, oh, does this just make it like I just don't care enough? But I was like, no, I care a lot about this. It's really just, I think I realized it's not going to do me any good to be upset about it. But, you know.
It's so true. Yeah, and I think that's a line that I struggle with often. It's like the line of like caring too much and not. It's like trying to define yourself by something, but also not trying to make it like your entire life.
Exactly.
And like being okay and moving on. It's such a difficult, like it's so difficult to navigate that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been a very big mixed bag of feelings in the past week, but you know, we came home, I figured out like, okay, I, only ran 50 kilometers, so I still have energy. I can do another race in October and things are fine. It just means I can go back to this trail next year and try to even go lower than I thought I was going to, because I was on pace for a much better time than I expected. So yeah, I think lots of positives came out of it. And I mean,
that's so great.
Like, I played in the woods for 7 hours with my best friend in the world. Like, there's worse ways to have spent a day, right?
Yes, and I think that's one of the great things about trail running is that, like, there is such amazing beauty involved in it that, like, even when things go wrong, so I had this one race in Europe where I was, like, literally pooping on the side of the trail in front of like all these like tourist groups. It was like the most unbelievable place in the Matterhorn, and it was like, like even if things are going wrong, I'm still out in the woods in this incredible place, and that's something that I love about trail running.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny. I was going to ask, one of the questions I had was, how do you deal with on race day when things don't go according to plan? Do you have kind of like a series of mental things you go through or physical things you go through when that happens?
Yeah, so I think the way that I approach races is that I expect for things not to go to plan. So like I very rarely accept a perfect race. And that's again the nature of trail running and ultra running, is there's just too many variables to be able to control them all. And the goal for me is that I feel like in training, I try to embrace those variables, so like embrace the times that aren't necessarily going well. So like whether my run got delayed, or like my legs aren't feeling good, or I had to eat lunch and then go for a run. It's like I try to embrace those as learning experiences so that I can then bring to race day. Mm-hmm. So I would say that most things for me that have gone wrong on race day, I've also experienced in training and have come to embrace in training. And so I think that's part of it. The other thing is just looking at it as comedy. So like, laughing at yourself when things might not go right and being able to view it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you and David are two of the most, I'd say, like optimistic or like happy people I know, but like in the most genuine way that I can possibly imagine. So I have to ask, how do you keep that up?
So I think comedy helps a lot. So David and I spend a lot of our time together laughing at each other and like being open and honest about that. I think also too, just being willing to embrace, like we've both had a lot of like hard times. I mean, not like I think people out in the world have experienced a lot harder things than we have, but like relative to our own lives, we both had difficult moments. And I think being able to take a step back and just understanding that it will be okay, and that like we both have developed the tools to deal with these moments. I think that's been a helpful mindset for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. At one point, I'm updating my training log every day, and at one point, David is like, it's okay to say you've had a bad day or like something didn't go right. And I was like, to be honest, right now, if I think about it, like everything's going pretty good considering. Like I'm, running at noon and getting in like 16 miles on a Wednesday, and life is like, I just don't really have anything to complain about. Like, could I be like, oh yeah, like it was a little hot today? Sure. Or like, didn't feel like amazing at this one point, but overall, I don't really have a whole lot to complain about. So it's hard for me to write like a negative training log.
That perspective is helpful, and I think that perspective like develops more and more with time as you grow with new experiences and as you grow as an athlete. The other thing I've really learned as an athlete is just the power of listening to intuition. So I think over the last couple of years, I've really come to just listen to the emotions and the thoughts that I'm feeling and just taking them for what they're worth. So like, waking up in the morning and maybe not feeling like I want to get out of bed, or waking up and feeling maybe angry or frustrated or sad, and just like listening to those emotions and thinking about why they're there and acknowledging them as opposed to trying to fight them or like constantly be optimistic. I think acknowledging them and just bringing light to them is helpful.
Yes, absolutely. And that actually leads really nicely into one question that Peter wanted me to ask is for runners who aren't feeling super motivated and would maybe prefer to sit on the couch instead of getting out, what is the happy runner? How would you approach that with a client in getting them motivated to get out to run?
Yeah, so I think there's two different ways that you could look at that. One is in an athlete who has been kind of like consistently pushing the limits or has been in a really hard training cycle. And I think in that situation, it's important to think about stress, both in terms of running and in life, and making sure that the athlete's not slipping into any sort of overtraining or overreaching. Because sometimes the lack of motivation or not feeling like you want to train is actually the body's way of telling you that you're pushing too much in life, you're pushing too much in training. And in that situation, I would tell an athlete either just get out the door and do a super easy, like 20 to 30 minute shuffle, just get the legs moving, or to take a rest day and to listen to the body. Then I think the other situation is in an athlete who might not be at risk for overtraining, but just has a lot going on in life and maybe is struggling to get out the door. We all deal with that. Like, I think across every runner, like, we all have these Tuesday runs where it just feels hard to get out the door. And what I say is, like, remove the metrics. Just go out. Don't look at pace. Just say, hey, I'm going to be out here for 30, 45 minutes and get in some time out there. Maybe turn on music, find different ways, music, podcasts, anything to just, like, lighten up the run and take it easy and make sure to listen to your body.
Yeah, I love that. The one thing I always end up going with is like, okay, you could not run today, but you're not going to watch Netflix or read a book right now. You're going to either work on this article or clean the house or do something that's actually productive. And you know what? Suddenly running doesn't actually sound all that bad.
That's so true. The other thing, too, is I find the first few steps out the door are the hardest. It's the first 3 or 5 minutes, like, it's like the body is like telling you, it's like, oh, don't make me do this. And then it gets like progressively easier from there. So I think like understanding that is helpful.
Yeah, please. For me, the worst part is like putting on the sports bra. For some reason, that is, and like socks. Those are my two biggest struggles.
I have recently started this like dynamic warm-up that involves like, it's like part dynamic warm-up, part dancing. And I feel like it really helps me just like, it helps wake my body up and kind of like prepare for those first 3 or 5 minutes. And just like, because it's a routine, it's like my body knows it's going to run after going through and doing this. And that's been helpful.
Oh, I love that. Do you just like literally dance around, or do you have like a straight up like dance routine, or what do you do? What is this?
So I have this dynamic warm up. It's like the classic like D hugs, Tin Man shoulder. I can't even speak. Tin Man soldier things. So I have this like whole progression that I go through, and at the end of each little like exercise, I do some kind of dance move. So it's like usually it's different every time. I don't have enough dance skills to have like a coordinated choreographed routine, but I think it's just like the action of it that it's helpful, it's joyful, it gets the body moving.
I'm totally picturing this as like do you remember like those old like Paula Abdul dancercise videos from like the early 90s?
Oh, totally.
That's basically what I'm imagining.
Except I'm really not a good dancer, but I have like no care in the world, and it's like 6 a.m. in our apartment complex. So it does not look like that, but in my mind it kind of does.
The life versus athletic stress. I would love it if you could just kind of remind everyone that life stress, plays into athletic stress and vice versa.
Absolutely. So the way that I look at it is that we all have this bucket to fill. And like what goes into the bucket is cortisol, or a stress hormone that the body produces when we go through stressful situations. So the interesting thing to think about is that like the bucket is the same for everyone, and running and life feed into that bucket equally. Not equally, but like they both feed into that bucket. And so as a result, things like being up in the middle of the night with an infant, or having a stressful presentation at work, or traveling, those are all things that feed into that stress bucket in the same way that running does. And so it's important to listen to how your body is feeling and to make sure that you're adjusting your running in the context of the other life stressors that are going on.
Yes, I mean it's so easy, especially now with social media, and I like hate to do this, like, because I'm like, oh, everyone talks about the comparison trap on social media and stuff, and it feels like kind of played out, but I still feel like it's always worth re-mentioning. But it's so easy to, scroll through Instagram and be like, everyone is running more than I am, and just be like, super disappointed in yourself, even though you have no idea what the other person's actually doing, number one, and then number two, like how their life stress and what they're doing in their life compares to what you're doing.
That's so true. I think the other thing is I spoke before about like the genetic influences on body weight and how every body is different. I also think the same thing for stress. So I coach some athletes who struggle with stress, or who like one stressor to them might be very different to another person's stressor. And I think like just because one person seems to be conquering the world in this area doesn't mean that like we all can do that either. And I think that is also something that's helpful for athletes to think about.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, one runner's mileage might not genetically be a mileage that's going to make any kind of sense for you.
Exactly. And we all respond so differently to training. And that's the fun thing about being a coach is like you get to figure out how different people respond to things. And so I have some athletes who respond really well to 35 miles a week, and other athletes who respond well to 80 miles a week.
Yeah.
And you flip them and each athlete may not excel. And it's interesting to see that play out.
Okay, kind of rapid fire here. I'd love to get some technical running tips since you're obviously pretty awesome at trails. Trail uphills. What are your best tips for running uphill well?
Ooh, that's great. So I think leaning into the hill, like you don't have to be crazy about it, but I think if you've seen videos of Kilian Jornet power hiking or running up steep grades, his torso is often pretty far forward, and so making sure that you're not bending backwards, so like really keeping that forward lean going as you're going uphill is helpful. The other thing is relaxing the shoulders. So I see a lot of athletes tense up the shoulders as they run uphill, and oftentimes that starts with relaxing the jaw. So like tension in the seat can project down to tension in the shoulders, and so just making sure that upper body is relaxed as you're leaning forward and as you're powering uphill.
Oh, I love that. It's so funny. When I first started cycling and was racing a road like 10 years ago, I remember we were going up a hill in one of my first races, and the girl next to me was like, hey, just so you know, like what my coach has told me is like, just try to let your upper body relax because you're wasting so much energy with how tense you are. Because like I had like a death grip on the bars, and like I'm just like murdering myself trying to get up this thing. And as soon as I relaxed my shoulders, it was a million times better. But I never thought about applying that to running. So I'm so excited to think about that now.
It's great. I've done some runs actually with heart rate monitor, and like I can actually visibly see the changes in the heart rate as I relax my upper body and as I relax my face and jaw.
Oh, cool. Now, do you have any tips on keeping your jaw relaxed? Because I can definitely relax mine for like half a second. And then if I check it again, like 5 seconds later, I'm like, yep, clenched again.
It's hard. So I think with all of these like changes in either like relaxation or technique or biomechanics, just kind of like working it into small pieces of the run. So starting like in the first 5 minutes of a run initially and being like, I'm going to focus on relaxing my jaw, kind of reminding yourself to do that every 20 seconds or so. And then progressively working up from there to where it becomes more of a habit. Because I think like if you go into running, like I'm going to relax my jaw for this entire 2-hour long run, it just becomes exhausting to think about. And like bringing it down into more manageable chunks helps it translate over time. And it's just that brain jaw connection where you just have to tell yourself to relax it. And oftentimes that means just like not grimacing. Sometimes like a gentle smile can help. I think it's usually different for everyone.
Actually, I have noticed, the power of just smiling a few times throughout the race. It's amazing what it does for your whole body, because I feel like it actually changes your like stress hormones and how your brain chemistry is working.
It's true. And there's studies out there on that too, and there's some powerful studies that it can improve running time, it can improve running times. And so it's fun to see something like that translate into science.
Not to mention it looks way better in race photos.
It does. I've had some like race photos where I just have like goo drooping down the sides of my face, and there's like a grimace going on, and it looks a heck of a lot better with a smile.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what about running downhill?
Yes, this is something that I see a lot of athletes struggle with. So I would say, David and I use the phrase "let Jesus take the wheel," is just to really remove that tension from the body. And it's horrifying. At first, it's really horrifying. I actually didn't consider myself a good downhill runner. And then in one of my first trail races, I showed up and Magda Goulet, who's a Western States winner and just an all-around awesome trail runner, was at the start line. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have to race fast. And I burned off the bottoms of my feet running downhill. So it was like, to me, it was like, I think every athlete just needs that like moment in training or a race where you just take the brakes off and realize that you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can do that pretty well in like an open double tracky situation, but as the terrain gets gnarlier, I definitely get more and more tentative, which I feel like actually just ends up leading to more mistakes and face plants anyway.
Yes, that's true. And I think another thing, like from a technical standpoint, I think like having the looseness in the body, so like making sure that your upper body is not tense. I see that often on downhills is that like things start to tense up as you worry about like tripping or falling or like hitting a rock.
Mm-hmm.
So avoiding that tension, and then also making sure like the cadence and turnover is high so that you can respond. Like if a rock comes up, that you're not overstriding and like hitting that with all of your force. So keeping your cadence or your turnover a little bit higher as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the tension. Peter makes fun of me because I was an Irish dancer when I was a kid, so very like arms straight at your sides. And he said when I run downhill, you could definitely tell I used to do that because I get super, super tensed up. And luckily this summer, I think I've gotten over it, but
those dance skills are probably great though for like navigating rocky terrain. I love that. That's awesome. I hope you still practice.
I do not, unfortunately. I handed in my wig like 15 years ago. You used to have these like amazing giant curly wigs and giant dresses. It was a bit much.
I imagine. Well, I have that field hockey background, so I feel like I have this like twisting in terms of like my upper body motion on the trails, and it's interesting how like things we do in youth kind of come back into our running or come back into our athletic life.
Yeah, I feel like with soccer and field hockey, you guys probably did a fair amount of like the agility kind of drills with like the ladder and stuff, so that must be super helpful.
I love ladder drills. I actually give ladder drills to some athletes who feel like who are really motivated to work on technical downhills, just because I think it does help with like their neuromuscular connection and establishing kind of like the brain body connection.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny. I was actually thinking about trying to add that to my off season because I feel like that's something I never ever did as a kid. This is like the downside of being a super inathletic kid is you miss out on a lot of those things. It's not so much that I'm like, oh, I'm sad I didn't run cross country or I'm sad I didn't, play soccer, but like just those little drills, I did not have them.
I don't know. Irish dancing sounds like a very complicated sequence of ladder drills that I could never do. So I'm sure you will start the ladder drills and just you'll feel like you're doing a jig immediately off the start.
That actually might be true. I think if I could maybe think about it like that, it would probably go better, but I'd have to be on my toes a lot more.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
But yeah, you should start it. It'll be interesting.
And okay, so the last question is you and David have Addie dog, who is literally the cutest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Could you give me a quick pitch as to why dogs are very helpful, even if they're not necessarily the best runners? Every time I have a guest on the show that has a dog, I try to get someone to give me a pitch for why I need a dog. So
I love it. So Addie has been the gateway dog for like 20 different families at this point because it's a very pro dog. I think like across the board, dogs are like just the most amazing creatures. Like for me, it's like last night I came home a little bit late from work. It was like 7 p.m. and I opened the door and Addie squealed for about 2 minutes because she was so excited to see me. I'm sure at that point she thought I was like never coming back home. And like there's little things like that. It's just like continuous excitement that comes into life. And I think the other thing is that excitement applies to everything. It's like we go on a walk. It's the best walk ever. We go out to dinner. It's the best burger she's had ever. And I think seeing like the excitement through her eyes changes how I view the world and changes how I view like things that could be considered simple things that do become the big things.
Mm-hmm. And
it's the power of having a 5-second memory.
I love it. And I know she's not really much of a running dog though, right? Like she doesn't do major trail runs.
No, so she used to run quite a bit as a younger dog. She's 7 now, and we took her for a pretty hard 10-mile run around 6-minute pace. And after that, she refused to run again. I think she was like, "I've seen my limits. Like, I do not need to go through this." But so she'll run. She'll do like adventures with us off leash, but she won't run with us on leash. And we respect that. I mean, I think it's, she knows what she likes, and we're just so grateful for the love that she brings.
So it's definitely worth getting a dog.
It's 100% worth getting a dog. And I think, like, when we were running with her, again, it's like you're seeing the trail through her eyes, like you're seeing the little things that she sees, and it makes the run even more meaningful.
Yeah. And okay, I have to actually add one more question because I meant to ask it and I forgot, but you mentioning coming home from work a little late reminded me. I remember listening to you on a couple of podcasts, and you seem so just ridiculously busy. How are you balancing? And now you're going to have this PhD stuff going on too. How are you balancing all of the things that you do?
So I think for me, I've had a lot of difficult decisions about like whether I wanted to go into clinical practice as a physician or whether I wanted to go into research. And it's definitely been a year of a lot of different decisions. And I think that along the way, I've made decisions to do things that bring me a lot of joy and that I love. And of course, it's hard to love something every day. It's like, I probably love these things 90% of the time, and that feels reasonable to me. But I think as a result, it's like I'm doing a lot of different things that I love, and so it makes it easy to prioritize those things. But I think in addition to that, I keep my life very simple outside of those things. So like I enjoy spending time with David and Addie and doing these things and running, but it's like as a result, I say no to a lot of other things that could seem exciting. And I think the power of saying no has been helpful.
Yeah, that's another one, like self-advocacy I need to get better at. But
yes, I used to be terrible at it, and then I got myself so overcommitted that I was like at a point where I was so stressed where it was like, I need to learn how to do this.
Now, do you find yourself traveling less as a result, or how has that worked?
Well, recently I've actually been traveling more just because there's been a series of things that I haven't been able to say no to. But I think travel is one of those things that can kind of tip the scale for a lot of people. It's like, I think it throws people out of their routines, or it can just be challenging. So I think it's important, like, if you're traveling, to really ask yourself, like, is this essential for who I am? Is this going to bring added joy to my life? Or, like, is this something that I really need to do for work? And filtering it through that lens is helpful. And I think, like, I have a few different lenses which I filter decisions through, and I think that framework has been big for me.
Really wish I'd talked to you like 8 weeks ago. I feel like it would have changed the next like 3 months worth of plans for me.
Well, definitely. You can also, like, I think people really respect me call up and just say, hey, I'm really overbooked, or, I'm going through a little bit of over life right now, and like, it's just, I can't do it. I think people respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have friends that just make fun of us because every time we say, oh, we're totally going to be around for a while, they've just started rolling their eyes at us because they know we're lying. I'm like, one day I'm going to say it and mean it, but not today.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. Saying no gets a heck of a lot easier when you practice it in the mirror, when you have set ideas of how you're going to do it. So it definitely took me a while to get there.
Oh my gosh, it's just going to be me in front of the mirror now going, you are enough. And then, no, you are enough.
No.
Oh, amazing. Okay, where can everyone find you and the book and everything else on the interwebs?
Yes. So the most important person or creature to find on the interwebs is Addie Does Stuff, which is both David and Addie Dog. So it's an Instagram that's told through the lens of Addie and her voice, which is in all capital letters. I am also on Instagram as Meg Runs Happy with all these underscores, and then on Twitter as well.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content. and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.